Good morning, Scottsville. Today I'm going to be speaking about bridging the generation gap. My text today is from Ruth chapter 2 verses 19 to 23. On September the 13th, 1993, Bill Clinton stood proudly behind Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Yitzhak Rabin, who was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, as they signed the Oslo Accord on the White House lawn. That was yet another attempt at bridging the gap that exists between Israel and Palestine, a gap that's existed for centuries, and a gap that has never ever really been bridged by any person. As I said, today I'm talking about bridging the generation gap. We as the church cannot fail to bridge the gap between baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, because we all make the church up as Christ's body. The book of Ruth shows us ways in which we can actually bridge the generation gap. My first thought today is show interest in each other. In order to do this, you have to work on previous information. Remember that Ruth had already given Naomi previous information. In Ruth 2 verse 2, Ruth tells Naomi what her plans for the day are. It says, "And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, 'Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor.'" Ruth told Naomi what she was going to do. And in order for Naomi to show that she loved and appreciated Ruth, she needed to work on that information and show interest in it later on. But remember also in Proverbs 16 verse 28, Solomon tells us what the principle is for daily use. He says, "A perverse man stirs up dissension, and a gossip separates close friends." One of the greatest dangers and one of the most serious problems in the world today is, of course, gossip. What is ultimately really false information, fake news as such. And that's causing major problems amongst people. Not just in terms of the generation gap itself, but just in terms of people. We're having major issues today, especially in the time of COVID-19, with fake news. And we need to make sure that we don't subscribe to such reality, and that we work on what we know and what has been told us. And remember that Ruth had received news to tell. Notice that Naomi, in these verses from 19 to 23, lets Ruth do the talking. And here we notice the importance of listening. Have you ever spoken to someone and they constantly seem to be looking over your shoulder at something happening behind you? Your natural instinct is to look behind you. But the reality, of course, is there's a greater problem. It's very obvious that the person you are talking to is not interested in what you are saying. Listening is a remarkable gift, but it is also a very important thing that we can do. And notice that Ruth lets Naomi hear it all. Here we see the importance of openness. We can't be closed books. We need to open up to each other. We need to show each other our real lives, and we need to be ourselves in front of each other. But let us also focus on prioritized moments. Remember that communication takes time. When is communication? There is always at least two people involved. And this means that there is always at least two life stories to tell. In order for that to be a reality, we need to give each other time. We can't be looking at our watch all the time. We can't be sitting worrying about what people are doing elsewhere all the time. We need to give each other space and time to speak. And remember that questions need answering. Don't ignore each other and don't resist. Naomi in these verses asks Ruth a question, and she doesn't walk away saying nothing. She tells Naomi everything that's happened. My second point today is be happy for each other. The significance of this event in Ruth's time, as we look at the context of this happy day, we must not ignore what Ruth and Naomi had been through with each other before. A few weeks ago I spoke about this. Losing husbands, losing their home, having to move away from a life that they had gotten to know, back to a life that they had probably forgotten about, and in Ruth's case, didn't even know about at all. And also don't ignore how Ruth and Naomi are related to each other. They are actually not even blood. Naomi was Ruth's mother-in-law, but this did not detract from the relationship and from the reality of their need for each other and their dependence on each other. But now, let me take you to the concept of the kinsman redeemer mentioned in these verses. Back in Numbers chapter 27, verses 8 to 11, God gives Israel command around the issue of the kinsman redeemer. God says, say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, turn his inheritance over to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan. This is to be a legal requirement for the Israelites as the Lord commands Moses. God wanted to ensure that family remained and that the generations continued into the future. And then of course if we go further into Ruth, in Ruth 4 verses 1 to 6, we see the negotiations taking place. And I just want to read those verses for you. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so that I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Boaz then said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you get Ruth the Moabitess. You acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. This was a moment of extreme importance in Ruth's life. And the happiness that comes as a result of this is unbounded. And we will deal with this moment next week in my next message. But to continue with today, the significance of this event for our times. Scripture demands that we share each other's emotional status. Romans 12 verse 15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Scripture also demands that we carry each other's emotional burdens. Galatians 6 verse 2 says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. I want to move on to my third thought. And in order to keep the alliteration, I've decided it will be shoot love to each other. I want to take you to the New Testament. Remember Jesus' disciples. Jesus' disciples came from different backgrounds, different families, and different districts. And Jesus' disciples constantly engaged in arguments, questions, and lessons. They were a motley crew of people, and they were different in every possible way. And yet, Jesus constantly sought to bridge the gap between all of them. Remember Jesus' prayer in John 17. In everything Jesus did and said, he was constantly working on bringing the disciples together and not driving them apart. And this was epitomized in his high priestly prayer in John 17. Remember Jesus' command in John 13. It is so important that we realize that the bridge between the disciples and the world was only going to be bridged by love. And this is the same reality we face today. In talking about bridging the generation gap, we need to know that we need to love each other as Jesus commanded us to. For it is in this way that people will know that we are his disciples. But let's go back to Ruth. Remember Ruth's nationality. Ruth was a Moabite in Israel. Read Ruth's story. The undercurrent of everything that happens in Ruth is love. And it's love the emotion as well as love the principle. The bridge of unity that develops in Ruth is based on this reality. As Ruth eventually marries Boaz, but also, of course, becomes part of the community in which she belonged in Bethlehem. I want to close. As you will probably know, I am a father of 2 millennials. Richard is 18, Stephen is going to be 16 in November. Now, we don't always agree. Let me get that out straight. In spite of the fact that I am classified as Generation X, and that the boys are classified as millennials, we don't always agree on issues and definitely on music. That's probably the one area where we have our greatest debates and discussions, the area of music. But I love my boys. And I know they are my boys, they're my sons. But it goes deeper than that. You see, their nature is driven by the fact that they were born post-2000 or in the millennial period. But they know that in spite of the fact that there will be disagreements, that there will be moments when they drive me up the wall, that I will always love them. We need to know as a church that we need to love each other. One of the wonderful privileges that we have is a youth group, a seniors group, and then a whole lot of people even in the middle. We need to make sure that whether we are a baby boomer or a Generation X or a millennial, that we don't allow the generation gap to destroy what God has created at Scottsville Baptist Church. We so often see ourselves standing in front of the church giving testimony. A year and a half ago from Zambia, Holiday Bible Club's another one. There are so many ministries where we all come together and we all bless each other. But let us make sure that that never ends. As I said at the beginning, Bill Clinton tried. 30 years later, they're still fighting. Let us make sure that that does not happen to us as a church But even more importantly, let's take that out to the world and make sure that people start loving each other in the world as well. This is such an important issue. We'll meet together again next week as I will do my last message in this mini-series in Ruth. I trust that you look after yourselves and keep well, and we'll see you again next week. Every blessing to you.